Welcome to today's presentation. And basically, we want to be discussing today the definition of health as understood astrologically. So, this is a kind of a context to study medical astrology, the way I look at it. And before I get on with the presentation in toto, let me just flash this regular disclaimer which I always have. I'm a medical doctor and I fully subscribe to the benefit and utility of modern medicine for the treatment of disease. Having said that, I do believe that understanding of Ayurveda and Jyotish, if correlated uh, with modern medicine, can sort of help us to recontextualize some of the terminologies of modern medicine and help us in our quest to be more holistic in the whole health and wellness process. So, having said that, here goes. Let's proceed with today's talk. So, basically, let's look at the definition of health as defined by the World Health Organization. So this is a very all-inclusive, very all-encompassing definition. Okay, so normally when we speak of somebody well, unwell, it's more like somebody's been hospitalized, somebody is now well, somebody was operated upon. Uh, but if you look at health in toto, when you say I am healthy, what it would mean as per the WHO is that it is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, okay, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. So apart from the physical and mental obviously are taken together because the body and the mind is almost like a same phenomenon with two ends of the spectrum. Man being a social animal, his well-being in society directly impinges on his own well-being. His interactions with society have a direct bearing on how he perceives himself to be, his sense of wellness. Okay, so therefore, obviously, the social well being. And look here, the most important thing here is not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. So, somebody is well, somebody has no illness, you know, his biochemical parameters, his blood tests, his x rays, his ECGs are all normal. He is leading a normal life. Can this be considered healthy? Not necessarily. Is he in a state of physical, mental, and social well being? Okay, if he is not completely anchored to his own self, if he is feeling out of place with his own mind, perhaps he is not well. So, therefore, we need to understand this sort of all encompassing definition of health and then correlate it with what the ancients have been talking about. Now, we would find that this is a quite an enlightening definition. But if you look at Ayurveda, okay, and if you look at the concept of koshas in Ayurveda, you have the koshas or the five sheaths which are studied in Ayurveda and in yoga as well. So you have here uh, the Annamaya kosha, for example, which is the first sheath, which is the sheath of the body. This is the existence at the level of the body. Then you have the Pranamaya kosha. Prana is literally translated as breath, but English cannot do full justice to Sanskrit constructs. Prana is actually is more of a vital force kind of a thing. So breath as vital force. So you have the second sheath, which is the sheath of vitality. You have the bioenergetics of a human being, which is the pranamaya kosha. Then you have the manomaya kosha. So this is the sheath which is generated by the feelings, by the mind, by the activities of the mind, by the emotions, by the thoughts. Okay, so this is the mental well-being part that we are talking about. The first two would constitute the Annamaya and the Pranamaya would constitute more to do with the physical well-being. The Pranamaya could be a bridge. So you see that the breath is a bridge between the body and the mind. We all already know that in yoga, right? In pranayam, for example. Then you have the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is the sheath of intellect. So all activities of the intellect, rational thinking, uh, the sign of an evolved human being. What makes us a human being and not a human doing is the Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then of course the Anandamaya Kosha, which is the sheath of bliss. So this is something that one would probably experience during transcendence, during deep states of meditation and the like. Okay, so this is the very elaborate paradigm for health, as you notice in the ancients. And therefore it is no wonder that when Jyotish began to look at health, or when you look at health in the Kundali, you find all of this and much more. Having said that, now let us go to the Kundali. Now, when I'm talking of the Kundali here in the context of health, I am essentially talking of the Lagna Kundali or the D1 chart. I am not referring to the divisional charts, which are more conceptual and much more um, thematic or domain specific. We are looking at the D1 chart, in which the first house is called the Lagna or the ascendant. Okay, so we are going to be discussing the physical part of the health using the D1 chart. Now let's look at what all aspects of Jyotish correlate with the physicality of a human being. So, what are the different Jyotish correlates? Obviously, we are looking at the Lagna or the ascendant. Now, the ascendant is the self, as it were. It's the self, it's the body of the person, it's the immediate instinctual mind of the person as well. It is the instinct, it is the self. It is how a person will react if suddenly woken up, let's say in the middle of the night. It is the essential nature of the human being, the prakriti in a way. So that determines a lot how, what kind of a body the person has, what kind of a body is are we looking at in this case. Now, obviously, one of the 12 zodiac signs of the Rashis will be there in the Lagna. Now, depending on the nature of the Rashi, okay, so is it a cardinal sign? Is it a fixed sign? Is it a mutable sign? Or if you want to use the Sanskrit terminology, is it a chara Rashi? Is it a sthira Rashi? Is it a dviswabhava Rashi? Okay, mutable is dviswabhav, chara is cardinal, and sthira is fixed. So depending on the nature of the Rashi, you will find the physicality of the person. You will find the nature of disease in some way. In some cases, something can be kind of prognosticated. Okay, so um, let's say a chronic illness in a person with a fixed lagna would perhaps last long. Let's say something like a cancer, but it could perhaps be better amenable to treatment if it was a cardinal lagna. Perhaps it would wax and wane. It would intermittently come and go if it was a mutable sign. Again, these are generalizations, so we have to avoid generalizations. But I'm just trying to talk about these just to give a sense of how these could impact the physicality. Uh, the elements of the sign would matter a lot. So, is it a fiery sign? If it is Aries, it's fiery. If it is Taurus, it's earthy. If it is Gemini, it is a airy sign. If it is Cancer, it's watery. So, let's say somebody has a watery sign in the lagna, let's say a Cancer or a Scorpio, um, or a Pisces, and let's say this person is suffering from mental illness. Okay, I mean, it would be perhaps safe to infer that there would be very deep emotional trauma. There could be a lot of emotional catharsis, lot to do with some kind of a childhood trauma, something which really is hurting the person very badly, because the water element would stand for the mind. Again, a word of caution here: we shouldn't generalize, but it would help. So a earth element, say, earth element sign which is of fixed nature, say for example, would behave differently than a earth element sign, or let's say than an air element sign which is of fixed nature. Okay, so let's look at, say, if it is Taurus, if it's a Taurus ascendant, it's a fixed sign, it's a fixed Rashi, or a Prithvi or a Sthira Rashi, and it is also a Prithvi Tattva Rashi because it's a earth element. Contrast that with a Kumbha Lagna or Aquarius Lagna, which is again um, a fixed sign, a Sthira Lagna, but it is a airy sign. It's a Vayu Tattva. So you find the whole kind of intellect, the whole kind of thinking, the whole kind of physicality of a person would be very different with a Taurus ascendant and a and a an Aquarius ascendant. Of course, I'm not even referring to the lords of the ascendant, which would completely then add many more dimensions. Here for Taurus it being Venus, for Aquarius it being Saturn, right? Again, now the third point is of course the lord of the ascendant. So having analyzed these two things, what is the lord of the ascendant? It would matter, right? I mean, if the lord of the ascendant say were to be Jupiter, okay, generally speaking, one would imagine that the person would not be very thin, emaciated, would have a fairly good physical mass, not necessarily obese, but somebody who's well, who's who has sufficient, who's sufficiently rounded, let's say, But if the same ascendant lord would be say a Saturn, you know, one could perhaps expect a lanky kind of a, lanky kind of a stature. Of course, provided that the same Saturn is not aspected by a Jupiter, then it would change again. But again, I'm saying the lord of the ascendant would matter a lot. Whether it is a malefic lord, whether it's a benefic lord, whether it's a Jupiter, whether it's a Venus, whether it's a Saturn, Mars, uh, or whether it is Mercury. We heard of the term mercurial, right? We read this when we read English, we read this. That person has a mercurial temperament. What does that mean? It would in the context of Jyotish, it would mean a lot to do with perhaps having a Mercury ascendant. I wouldn't be surprised if such a person who is described having a mercurial temperament has a Gemini ascendant or a Virgo ascendant, for example. Nakshatra of the Lagna would matter a lot. When I say Lagna Nakshatra, I mean the Nakshatra at the Bhava Madhya of the Lagna, at the center point of the Lagna. Correct? So that's really the core of the Lagna. That is the core uh, sort of nakshatra effect of the Lagna, which kind of supersedes or even transcends the effect of the Rashi there in a way. So let's say giving an example of the Taurus ascendant, say now you have a Taurus ascendant, it could be the ascendant nakshatra could be Kritika, okay, which is basically the first three padas of Taurus or Vrishab, or it could be Rohini, which are the next four padas, okay, or it could be Mrugashirsha or Mruga, first two padas. So total nine padas of the nakshatras. So it could be any of these three nakshatras. Now, somebody having a Rohini nakshatra um, lagna, Vrishab lagna, would be different than somebody having a Kritika nakshatra Vrishab lagna. You will find a person with Vrishab lagna Kritika nakshatra would be, you know, um, uh, would be very impulsive. Would perhaps, would want to deal with issues instantly. You know, going by the nature of Kritika or the cutting nature of the nakshatra, because of course the nakshatra deity there, the nakshatra lord is sun, as well the nakshatra deity is also Agni. So you have the fiery aspect of the Kritika, which is influencing this Taurus ascendant, for example. Or if somebody is with the Rohini nakshatra, you will find this person is much more stable, much more grounded. Why? Because it's the moon influence. It's the moon which is at peace. Because moon is utmost at peace with his favorite consort Rohini. So you find somebody who is very constructive, also very sensuous but extremely productive type of a person, not so much impulsive, more thoughtful. Okay, that would be Rohini. And then if you have somebody with and somebody say with the Mrugashirsha first two padas, of which are in Taurus, you find somebody who is sensuous, but very restless, very curious, somewhat creative, more artistic. Again, a very different expression. So the nakshatra of the Lagna Madhya matters quite a lot. You take any Rashi, you will find that uh, therefore two people of the same ascendant may have extremely different ways of approaching situations, or even how their physicality would matter. Would express itself. Grahas occupying, aspecting, beneficity, maleficity uh, is a no-brainer. We've already been discussing that. Uh, you know, uh, Typically, if the lord of the lagna is aspecting the lagna, then you find that the lagna is fortified. For example, okay. So let's say um, you have a Sagittarius ascendant with Jupiter as the lord of the ascendant, which is in the ninth house. Okay, and therefore with the fifth aspect on the lagna. So you find that it's a very powerful lagna, and person is likely to enjoy extremely good health. Particularly because ninth position of Jupiter is actually in the Kala Purush, its natural place, plus its fifth drushti on the lagna, and its ninth drushti on the fifth house is like a cherry on the cake kind of a situation, right? So it does matter. Uh, in the same breath, trinal and square lordships would matter, because here we are looking at it's possible that the lagna lord, is in connection with the trinal and the square kind of a situation. So that would matter quite a lot. So it let's say so you have here the Yogakaraka planet. If the Yogakaraka planet is in um, is in harmonious relationship with the lagna lord, you'll find that the person will enjoy well-being, truly speaking, in all phases of life. You know. So here we are talking about the physical aspect again. So again, as I'm talking, you realize that the discussion cannot be restricted only to the physical aspect, because essentially the physical, the mental, everything coalesces together. We are looking at, of course, the 3, 6, 8, 11, 12 house lordships here. This is the classic medical astrological perspective. You have the 6, 8, 12 houses, which are basically the Rogasthana, which is the sixth house, the house of disease or death. Eighth house is the house of longevity. So anything affecting the eighth house will affect longevity in a sense. 12th house is the house of decline. It's also the house of moksha, but from the physical perspective, it could mean decline. Correct. And the third house being a mirror house of the eighth house, with the bhavat bhavam concept. So therefore, the third house is also concerned with longevity or the lack of it, or the deficiencies thereof. And the 11th house is a mirror house of the sixth house. Okay, so it's like, sometimes woes begin at the workplace. So 11th house is also the professional network. So something which is not quite working out, there is the unease at work, you find that it will often affect health, because there is a direct connection with the sixth house there. So these connections will be very important to study with respect to the health or the physical aspect. The second and the seventh house, are the marak houses really. So it's important to study them as well. Sometimes the badhaka and the maraka are the same. You find that the badhaka badhaka planet and the maraka planet are the same, then that's again a problem. And uh, I'm just mentioning here, I don't want to go into detail, but I'm just mentioning the relevant Graha connections with the 22nd Dreshkan Lord and the 64th Navamsh Lord. So the 22nd Dreshkan Lord refers to the Lord of the 8th house in the D3 chart, which is the divisional chart called Dreshkan. I will not go into that in more detail, however. And the 64th Navamsh will indicate the Lord of the sign fourth from the moon in the Navamaush Kundali or the D9 chart. Okay, both of these you often find, if these are affected, these have connections adversely with the, say, with the lagna. For example, you will find that health will be certainly affected. Okay. Now, having said that, I want to kind of go to the mind part of it. Again, when we know that when physical health suffers, when the body is in pain, in suffering, in distress, the mind is automatically, immediately responding kind of synchronously. Likewise, if the mind is continuously under pressure, under distress, we'll find that the physical health would suffer. So with this qualifier, I am going to the next slide of mental health. Now here, typically when you look at the mental health, the moon becomes the center of the chart, or should become the center of the chart. Uh, the moon is the mind. The moon is in a sense the nurturing part of a person. So um, we need to analyze the chart keeping the moon sign as the ascendant. So consider the sign where the moon is placed as the first house or the ascendant, and try to analyze. Now, the nakshatra occupied by the moon is very very important to understand. The kind of the person, the kind of mind which is at stake here. We all know there are different kinds of minds. There is a mind of somebody like Vishwanathan Anand who becomes the world champion, or a Magnus Carlsen, or there is a mind of somebody like a Paganini who was a violin virtuoso, or the mind of somebody like Adi Shankaracharya, was one of the greatest saints of India. So the minds, it depends on the quality of the mind. What nakshatra is the moon occupying is very very crucial to understanding what kind of issues could be faced by the mind, okay, which the mind would either surmount or not be able to surmount. So imagine somebody having a moon in a Pushya nakshatra. Pushya nakshatra being a blessed nakshatra, blessed by Brahma, with the lordship of Saturn, and moon in Pushya nakshatra, Pushya being in the fourth house, fourth sign of the Kalapurush Kundali in Karka, in the fourth house. So the Sukhasthana, moon completely at rest, completely anchored, completely nurtured, very practical. It's a special kind of moon in Pushya, correct? Now contrast that, say, with a moon in, let's say, a Mula nakshatra, which is a nakshatra lord being Ketu, and nakshatra deity being Nirti, so the goddess of destruction. So you have here a moon which is very very deep, extremely, you can say, exploratory in nature, perhaps battling with some level of existential pain, figuring out its purpose in life. Somebody who is very very restless. Of course, if somebody overcomes this phase and really is able to transcend this, that person could perhaps become a saint as well. But you have a moon in Ketu, so a moon in Mula would be very much in touch with its own suffering. Okay, so you have different kinds of nakshatras which have very very different, ways of looking at it. Or if you have, so things like that. Um, so that's the point I wanted to make. I will not be giving more examples here. Now, the moon, the strength of the moon itself is very important. What's the strength of the moon in different divisional charts? Very important. Therefore, the Vimshopaka Bala becomes very important. Moon or mind is something which is abstract. It is something which you can't hold in your hand. It's not something which you can show to somebody. Look here, this is my mind. You can't weigh your mind. You can't tell somebody that my mind is of red color. It's a intangible. So it operates in various dimensions of a person's psyche, whether it is career, whether it is, what somebody inherits from one's parents, whether it is at the level of sibling, whether it is at the level of spouse, whether it is at the level of relationships with children. So you have various kinds of divisional charts where the moon's strength can be studied, and that is the basis of the Vimshopaka Bala. And then of course you have the Shad Bala, which is it's a very different way of computing the strength of a planet based on 6 different kinds of motions of the moon: Cheshta Bala, Kala Bala, all those kinds of things, correct? So the strength of the moon is very important. The position of the moon is very important. So when I say Navamaush position of the moon, I also mean the D1 position of the moon in the Lagna Kundali. But sometimes you find that in the Lagna Kundali the moon is very well placed, and there is still some kind of a mental distress there, and therefore you look at the D9 chart and you find that the moon is not in a good position, correct? So the position of the moon is very important. And is the moon in Gandanta? Now Gandanta, or these knots which you are aware, there are 3 locations in the Kundali. So it could be either Ashlesha Magha Gandanta, which is at the junction of the Cancer and Leo, or it could be a Jeshta Mula Gandanta, which is at the junction of Scorpio and Sagittarius, which is actually considered to be the Abhukta Mula, or a very fierce kind of a Gandanta there, particularly the last pada of Jyeshtha and the first pada of Mula. And finally, you have the Revati Ashwini Gandanta, which is basically between Pisces and Aries. So these are connections between watery and fiery signs. And the moon placed in the Gandanta uh, sometimes gives unique challenges and some unique gifts as well. Okay, uh, if the moon is in Gandanta and if the position of the moon is not good in the D1 and the D9, and if it has some malefic aspect over and above this position, one could perhaps expect some kind of a mental health issue. Again, one should not generalize. Now let's look at some other peripheral but equally important things. Now you have in the Panchang, you have the nakshatra, var, tithi, yog, and uh, basically the um, nakshatra, var, tithi, yog, and um, basically the five elements of the Panchang. Now you have the birth tithi, which is very important. Now, if the tithi, it depends on what is the tithi. There are tithis which are malefic in nature, so one has to be very mindful of that. What is the tithi that this native is having? There are malefic karanas also. Now, basically, a tithi is made up of two karanas. Okay, so if there are 15 tithis in one paksha or Shukla paksha say, or 15 tithis in Krishna paksha, you have in all 30 tithis, and you have therefore 60 karanas. Now, there are some special karanas which are malefic. So just before the dark moon day, which is the Amavasya day, just before that, the previous tithi, okay, the second half of the previous day or the previous tithi is called Shakuni Karana. Shakuni Karana is not considered to be good for health. The mind will always be conspiring, trying to plot something. It is a kind of a diseased mind. Okay. Then you have the Amavasya. Somebody born on Amavasya will be either born in the first Karana, which is called Chatushpada, or the second Karana, which is the Nagava. Now these Karanas are under the influence of Rahu and Ketu, respectively. So they are not considered to be quite that auspicious to be born into. And then, of course, the first half of the Pratipada, or the first new moon day, the first day of the as the new moon is breaking, is called Kinstugna current, which is again not very good. So these tithis or currents are very important to look at. We need to look at the connection of Uranus and Neptune with the moon, very much so. Now Uranus and Neptune are the outer planets, but there is enough evidence now of empirical nature, particularly with Western astrology, which has done a good amount of research in medical astrology, is that basically the Neptune really kind of correlates with the pineal gland in the human being. Okay, the pineal gland is a kind of a gland which is correlated with the crown chakra. Okay, and which actually has a lot to do with let's say spiritual kind of impulses, as well as it does inform, or it is kind of in a sense guiding the pituitary gland, which is below it, or which is in front of it, or ahead of it. So therefore Neptune is basically correlated with the pineal gland, and you find that there are cases of, and Neptune is also synchronous or synonymous with Varuna of ancient Indian Jyotish. Varuna was the Adya Devata in the Rig Veda. So Varun is actually a asura. So Neptune is almost like a benevolent demon, if you may, which needs to be appeased. So therefore, if Moon Neptune combinations, there are sometimes adverse combinations which can give rise to some sort of insanity kind of a situation, or you know deranged mind kind of a situation sometimes. So we need to study that carefully. Uranus is equally important. Uranus is concerned with more of the regulation of the pituitary gland. So Uh, Moon Uranus again, therefore, needs to be carefully studied, because again the mind and the body are kind of correlated. Um, Fifth house quality and condition, very important. Fifth house stands for the prarabdha and the sanchita karma. This is the karma which started before you were born. So prarabdha, prior to the beginning, prior to the arabdha, prarabdha, and sanchita. Sanchita is that what was accumulated again. So something which has been accumulated. So the kind of karma. So you find that the quality of the fifth house would determine the kind of life you are born into. You know, the one house in the kundali which is directly like a portal to the past life is the fifth house. So the fifth house would matter a lot. We believe in the karmic theory of um, existence. You know, if you have a beautiful body and a wonderful mind, you certainly thank your parents, thank your stars, but thank your past life karma for sure. Okay. Um, Now, Rahu Ketu axis and its connection with the Moon Rashi is very indicative of karmic conflict. Correct. So, Rahu Ketu are karmic nodes. These are lessons to learn. So, depending on the houses through which Rahu and Ketu axis passes, uh, the lessons pertaining to those houses will be crucial. So, if Rahu Ketu axis passes through the first and the seventh house, lessons pertaining to how to relate to people, lessons pertaining to partnership, lessons pertaining to perception of self, self-esteem, um, all these self-actualization. These would be karmic lessons for that person. Now, there would be very different lessons if, for example, the Rahu Ketu axis passes through the fourth and the tenth house. There would be that in that case that there would be what one wants to do at the workplace vis-a-vis what one wants to achieve at home, and the conflicts between them, for example. So a moon if moon is getting caught up in the Rahu Ketu axis, it indicates certain level of conflict which affects the mind then, because there is a moon there, and therefore mental health. Now there is one advanced concept I want to discuss here, which is the concept of karakausha. And uh, a person's spiritual purpose in life. If a person is kind of divorced from his or her spiritual purpose, one would expect that that person is likely to be conflicted, is likely to be permanently at struggle, with himself or herself. So how does one look at that? So basically, typically you have what are known as the Charakarakas. These are basically promulgated by Jaimini Rishi, and these are called the Jaimini Karakas. And here you have the planet with the highest longitude, which is called the Atma Karaka. Okay, which is the basically the Karaka or the ac- actioner of the soul, with what the soul wants to do. Now, one has to locate the Atmakaraka in the D9 Kundali, let's say. Okay, so the position of the Atmakaraka in the D9 Kundali in which Rashi, that Rashi, consider that Rashi as the ascendant. Okay, so that's called the Karakausha ascendant. And the 12th house from that is the Moksha Sthana to the Karakausha. So that's actually the core spiritual purpose of your life. Why are you here? And even the deity which is signified by the planet there is the deity to which one must it is believed one must pray, so that your life purpose becomes unfolding the unfolding of your life purpose becomes more effortless. Okay, so for example, if that Rashi were to be, say, Scorpio or say Aries, and the Lord is Mars, then you find that often you find Hanuman, as the deity there. So therefore, then Hanuman, praying to Hanuman would perhaps uh, that would be the actual Ishta Devata in a sense, as per this concept. And uh, this also gives an indication, as I said earlier, of the purpose of the person. As I said, this is a bit of an advanced discussion, and this is a little bit more peripheral, but nevertheless, I thought it should be included. Um, Finally, the fourth house from the ascendant and the moon is the Sukha Sthana. So, Fourth from the ascendant would be what is comfortable, what is comforting, relaxing, anchoring to the body. Now, obviously, if I'm sitting on a wonderfully comfortable sofa, you know, with in a very peaceful environment with good ventilation, I'm going to be relaxed. My body is going to feel relaxed. If my body is going to feel relaxed, my mind also is going to feel relaxed. So obviously, the fourth house from the ascendant is also the sukhasthana for the mind, also the mind and the body, as well as we will be. Ideally, one would like to look at the fourth house from the moon also, because that would be where the mind is relaxed. So sometimes I may be sitting, I may be sitting on a bench outside outside, let's say a college, you know, and the bench is not particularly comfortable, but I am trying to catch a glimpse of my girlfriend who's coming out of that gate of the college, and it's very, very enjoyable, so my mind is at peace, because it is in the, that's the explanation I would like to give you. Sometimes your surroundings are not very comfortable physically, but your mind is very comfortable. So that's the fourth house from the moon, kind of a sukhasthana explanation. Okay, so mental health, Jyotish correlates, I think we have completed. What I will do now is I'll have a small swig of water, because my throat is really parched. And having done that, now let me go to the next part, or the last part of the definition, which we have looked at, which is the social health. Now, social health is kind of, there is more to it than meets the eye, really speaking. It seems to be such a small, minor, sober thing, social health, right? But then, social health means what exactly? It is, if you live in society, how are you reflected in the society? It's the reflection of the self out there. So if the self is the first house, if the self is the lagna, the ascendant, then out there is a mirror of the self, is the aspect of the self out there. So what is the mirror of the first house? Obviously, it is the seventh house. So it is how I am perceived out there in the seventh house. So the seventh house also, we know, is the house of partnership, house of um, dealing with others. So that's the social health. So when we are looking at the social health part, we have to obviously look at the seventh lord, the seventh house. Now, aspects of the seventh house. So what is the beneficity or the maleficity associated with the seventh house? So I will not go over the whole discussion again, because we have already covered the generics in the first slide. But then the seventh house needs to be studied carefully for the aspects on it, the planets occupying it, the beneficity, the maleficity associated, obviously. Now remember, the seventh house is also the natural maraka sthana of the native, of the kundali in the D1. The seventh house and the second house are the maraka sthanas, right? These are the maraka houses. Now, I believe this has very specific and particular significance with respect to the social health, because the second house also indicates communication in a way. It indicates vani, it indicates the throat area of the native. So, supposing somebody has a moon in the second house in Gemini, moon in Gemini in Ardra Nakshatra, for example, in the second house. Ardra Nakshatra is the nakshatra of Rahu. It would indicate somebody, and in Gemini, let's say if there is also moon present there, if there is also Mars present there along with moon, this would be a person who is verbally very, perhaps very aggressive, a lot of capable of a lot of verbal violence. Um, Obviously, if you are verbally abusive, abrasive, it is going to affect your standing in society, how you are perceived. It is going to have an impact on your social health. Correct? So the seventh house, the second house, both would matter. The third house also, because third house is the house of siblings. It is also a kind of an extended house of communication. It is also how you listen. Remember, the ear is covered. The ear is significated by the third house. You know, the third and the 11th houses, actually, both sides. So therefore, the third house is very important. If you are not able to listen well, how can you communicate well? If you are not able to communicate well, how can you interact socially effectively? If you cannot interact socially effectively, then can you experience good social health? That's the question to ask. The ninth house, now, ninth house is important because it's the house of fame and social status. So, say supposing somebody has a fixed ascendant, or what we call a sthira lagna, then the ninth house is the badhaka sthana. So, what is killing to a man with a sthira lagna? Damage to his fame. You know, if somebody with a chara lagna reputation is damaged, he or she will quickly get over it. It doesn't matter that much. Okay, but if somebody with a sthira lagna, say Taurus, okay, so or um, uh, say Leo, if his ninth house is damaged, his social status is damaged, you will find that the social health will he will suffer very adversely. Um, the 11th house is also important because it's the house of the professional network, as I said. Condition of Mercury is very important, particularly in D1 and D9, because Mercury is quicksilver. Mercury is actually is is the planet of communication, really, in a sense. So Moon is the planet of, or is the graha of mind, thinking, feeling, nurturing, emoting. Mercury indicates exchange, trade, communication. I give my thoughts to you. I share my thoughts with you. I take your thoughts. I process them, I analyze them. That is Mercury. So obviously, a deranged or a maladjusted Mercury does not augur wealth for social health. Then sixth and eighth aspectual relationships of Mercury present. So you have the Shadashtak. Often you find that Mercury and Moon are in Shadashtak or in six set aspects, either in the D1 and or in the D9. You can be sure that this person is not well adjusted. Correct? So we have discussed these things already. The last bullet also I have discussed. So these are the social health correlates of from the Kundali, right? So I think, I mean, to summarize, I feel and I can safely say that that the ancient rishis, they have perhaps thought about this aspect in ways that we have not even thought about. And I think modern medicine is kind of rediscovering health correlates or health aspects of health which have always existed. Okay, and so with this brief kind of a thing, I hope this kind of serves as some kind of a conceptual bridge between the old and the new, and I hope this spawns some thought processes and provoke some thinking. I will be happy if you can write your comments, and also give me some suggestions if you want to, right? In terms of what I could cover, or if I have left out anything, right? Thank you so much, and I leave you with this final quote by Homer. Bye, and see you soon. Thank you.